Hey, welcome to the Insurance Buzz. We are your hosts, Michael and Courtney Weaver, and we have a very special guest with us today, best-selling author, retirement income specialist, David McKnight. You probably know him best from the philosophy of the power of zero, which is a financial strategy designed to minimize taxes in retirement. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Honored to be here.
Absolutely. So let's just dive right in.
Let's get to the good
stuff. For
stuff.
those that have never heard of the power of zero, I would love if you could dive into it, and more importantly, why the power of zero is so important, not only for right now, but for individuals that are 30 years old, 40 years old. Like, what does this look like in the future?
Yeah, so the whole book is premised on this idea that we believe that tax rates, even 10 years from now, are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today. And this is for a whole host of reasons, but we'll get into a couple of these here real quick. We have huge unfunded obligations for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. They all add up to about $239 trillion. Very famous economist out of Boston University said, look, to be able to deliver on everything that we promise for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid that we can't afford to pay, we'd have to have $239 trillion sitting in a bank account today earning treasury rates to be able to deliver on all that stuff. So number one, that's a big problem, unfunded obligations. The second one is, notwithstanding all of those obligations, above and beyond those outstanding obligations, we have $34 trillion of debt that's slated to be $20 trillion higher even 10 years from now. And there's a recent study out of Penn Wharton that talks about how if all we do is continue on this same course, by 2043, there will be no arresting the financial collapse of our country. No combination of raising taxes or lowering spending will be enough to sort of deliver us from this financial collapse. So the long and the short of it is, in the next 10 years or so, the federal government's going to need huge infusions of cash to be able to pay for all of its commitments. And some of these commitments, they quite frankly just can't get out of. You can't get out of paying interest on your debt. Okay, you'd need an act of Congress to get out of paying for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid and adjusting those benefits for inflation. So we're sort of marching into this future where the federal government needs huge infusions of cash to pay its bills. And 95% of Americans have the lion's share of their retirement savings sitting in what we call tax-deferred vehicles like 401ks and IRAs. In other words, they've essentially entered into a business partnership with the IRS. And every year the IRS gets a vote on what percentage of your profits they get to keep. Not a very good business partnership, if you ask me. So you might have $1 million in your IRA, but unless you can accurately predict what tax rates are going to be in the year you take that money out, you don't really know how much money you have. And it's pretty hard to plan for retirement if you don't know how much money you have. And so the power of zero was my attempt to say, hey, look, Americans, baby boomers, you got all your money sort of squirreled away in these tax-deferred accounts, and we're at a period of historically low tax rates. Why not take advantage of those historically low tax rates to get those assets repositioned to tax-free so that by the time tax rates potentially double over time to pay for our country's bills, you've done all the heavy lifting, you can then take all that money out tax-free. And so the name of the book is The Power of Zero, and it's how to get to the 0% tax bracket and transform your retirement. I talk about the power of the 0% tax bracket being that if tax rates double and you're in the 0% tax bracket, then 2 times 0 is still 0. So that's sort of the premise for the book, and I wrote it sort of in response to what all the experts were saying about the future of tax rates.
What do I do now, hearing all of that?
So that's a good question. So what does the younger generation do to sort of shield themselves from the impact of higher taxes? And really, it's a pretty simple formula. I tell people that the farther out your retirement horizon, the more you need to invest in tax-free investments, 401ks, Roth 401ks, Roth IRAs, do Roth conversions. Some forms of properly structured cash value life insurance can even play, a complementary role in that whole balanced plan. But if you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, you're talking about retiring in, 20 to 50 years, 20 to 45 years, something like that. What is the likelihood that we are going to be at our current tax rates at that point in time? what is the likelihood that we will have liquidated all or most of our debt? What is the likelihood that we will have sort of somehow managed to rein in all of this profligate spending? It's not really that high, and we're fast approaching the point where, like the Penn Wharton study says, it doesn't really matter what we do. The debt will continue to grow, as a matter of course. And so as we march into this future and we ask ourselves the question, where should we be investing our retirement dollars? The answer should be increasingly be in tax-free accounts to shield ourselves from what is likely to happen years down the road. And so, don't let a year go by where you're not fully funding your Roth IRA. Don't let a year go by where you're not putting money into your Roth 401k or putting money into cash value life insurance as a complement to those other vehicles. So if you're like, hey, I'm going to retire next year and I have a 15-year life expectancy, maybe stick with your tax-deferred accounts. Maybe that's not going to be such a huge change. But for people that are trying to anticipate what is likely to happen in a 20 to 40-year future, man, tax-free seems to make a lot of sense to most people.
Is there anything else out there that someone could invest in to plan for the future to lower their tax burden?
Sure. One thing that I would say is don't completely neglect your tax-deferred retirement accounts, and here's why. When you retire, there's a good chance you won't have any deductions left, so the IRS in their infinite goodness will give you a deduction. They call it a standard deduction, which if you retire today as a married couple younger than 65 is $29,200. What does that mean? It means you could experience income from any number of sources up to $29,200 without paying any tax at all. So what does that mean? That means that if you shift all of your money to tax-free by the time you retire, you're going to have the standard deduction sitting there idle. And what does that mean? That means that you will have paid a tax unnecessarily on some of those tax-deferred assets, because you're now in a position where you've got 100% tax-free income and you've got a standard deduction that you can't use to offset any income. So what I would say is, if as a married couple, leave around $350,000 in your tax-deferred bucket. And what that'll do is it'll put you in a position where your required minimum distributions are offset by that standard deduction. So now when you look at the broader picture, you have Roth IRA, Roth 401k. You may need to do some Roth conversions somewhere along the way. You can have your RMDs offset by your standard deduction. We talked about cash value life insurance. And then there's one other thing I like to talk about, and that's Social Security. A lot of people don't realize that their Social Security can be taxed. Here's the thing. It felt like a tax when it came out of your check to begin with. Now you got to pay tax on it again, when you get it back on the back end. That feels like a double tax. It is a double tax, but people don't realize their Social Security can be taxed. And they also don't realize that when you take money out of your IRA, that's one of the biggest sources of what we call provisional income, which is what the IRS tracks to determine if they are going to tax your Social Security. So by keeping your balance in your IRAs of around $350,000, those RMDs are actually going to be low enough such that your provisional income is low enough so that your Social Security will not be taxed. So in summary, you have Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversions, RMDs offset by standard deductions, cash value life insurance, and if you can keep your provisional income low enough, then your Social Security is tax-free. And if you look at all those different things, they all add up to the 0% tax bracket. We love the 0% tax bracket because if tax rates double, 2 times 0 is still 0.